I'm the Executive Director with the Small Scale Meat Producers Association. Just a few notes before we start. This webinar is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your video. Sorry. Please also make sure you're keeping yourself muted during the presentation until the Q&A. If you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, or you can hang on and ask them yourself during the Q&A. And I think that's all of the business we need to cover. So the Small Scale Meat Producers Association is a nonprofit organization that represents BC farmers and ranchers who are raising meat outside of the conventional industrial system. The members of our society are primary producers, as well as supportive individuals and organizations from across the industry, as well as the wider community. Our mission is to build greater stability and growth opportunities for small-scale meat producers in BC. Producers join SSMPA to ensure that their voice is heard and that they're represented to the provincial government, as well as to the many other bodies that impact our work. True to its word, SSMPA has spent our first 3 years doing just that. We've been reviewing reports, writing formal submissions, researching regulations, talking to producers, and spending countless hours in meetings with countless representatives. And it's working. We've built great relationships with people who want to see our sector grow. Our capacity as an organization has also been increasing this year, especially as we received funding for a new project that has allowed SSMPA to hire my position. I'm the first non-volunteer position that the organization has ever had. It's amazing what we've been able to accomplish on a purely volunteer basis up to this point. The project that I'll be primarily working on this year is a survey that we'll be releasing later this spring. We're really excited to finally be able to do this survey. In this project, we're hoping to connect with each and every small scale meat producer in the province, which is quite ambitious. But we want to hear about your experiences, your barriers, and the opportunities that you see for your success. For those of you that aren't already members, joining the Small Scale Meat Producers will let you stay up to date on all of these kinds of things that SSMPA is doing and have the opportunity to be involved. Membership is $35 a year. I'll put a link in the chat right now for our online membership form. There you go. And we do hope that you'll join us. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome you all to our first webinar for 2021. We're really glad to have you all joining us here today. We're pleased today to be hosting researchers from Kwantlen Polytechnic University's Institute for Sustainable Food Systems. Leah Sandler is a research associate with ISFS. She has a background in crop and fertilizer research, integrated pest management, water management, just kind of the gamut. Also she has experience in extension work in diverse climates and diverse circumstances. She also has personal experience working on small organic vegetable farms. Our second presenter will be Mike Robinson. He's an extension associate with ISFS, whose experience has been much more focused on BC. He has spent time managing an organic livestock operation on Vancouver Island before managing the Tsawwassen First Nation Farm School for a number of years. Mike is the research technician for the project we're featuring today, which is on hog grazing and pasture rotation. Leah and Mike, thank you for being here today. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Eva, for that introduction. My name is Leah Sandler, as Eva introduced me, and I'm going to talk first, and then Mike's going to talk second, so you'll get to hear from him as well. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen, just so that we all get to have the experience of following a PowerPoint on a Zoom webinar, which is always a fun experience, but it will hopefully there's lots of pictures. And then I'm going to put the PowerPoint on presentation mode. So just bear with me for 1 second. Okay, should be there. And people can see the screen fairly well. Yes? Wallapop, will you nod your head if that's the case? Great. So, okay, as I mentioned, my name is Leah Sandler, and the way we thought we would split this webinar up today is that I would kind of talk about the research that we've done the last 2 years at the Tsawwassen First Nation farm that Mike and I have done, and then after I would talk about the research, Mike would go more in depth about the kind of hog production rotation. Because this is for a small scale meat producers association, we thought that the majority of the people joining us today would be small scale meat producers. And so the hog production part is and the rotation is the meat of, if you will, pun intended, the meat of this presentation. And so our research does follow it well, but that also diving in more depth into the production systems that we're learning about as well, rather than just our data. So today, the research that we are doing and will continue this upcoming season is integrating hogs into a cover crop vegetable rotation to improve soil health. And so basically what I'm going to do is just talk to you a little bit about the conception of the research and our objectives, how we're doing it, and some preliminary results. So the idea behind this originally was that at the Tsawwassen First Nation Farm School, we are a organic small scale vegetable production with some livestock, so some hogs and some layers. But we're heavily focused on vegetables, and we work with a lot of small scale vegetable farmers. And so a lot of market crop farmers are putting whether it's half or some of their acreage into a cover crop to rest it, so that they're switching back and forth to try and rest their soils, as vegetable production can be quite intensive on the soil. And that they'll be putting cover crops in sometimes up to 3 times a year, looking at a spring, summer, and a fall cover crop application. And I don't think I really need to go into the benefits of cover crops here. People use them for the gamut, but soil organic matter, increasing fertility and nutrition in the soil, breaking weed, disease cycles, weed suppression, those kind of. And so, whatever the objective is for those cover crop seedings, veggie farmers are often doing them at least on some of their rested land. So the problem is that then that following season, going back in and terminating those cover crops is often done with tillage, particularly an organic system, is done with significant amounts of tillage that can really impact the soil structure, biological activity, etc. So I put this slide in here too, to try and really focus on our audience here today. Perhaps most of you joining us aren't necessarily vegetable farmers, but are more meat farmers. And so if you are a hog producer, potentially you're coming to this with wanting to gain knowledge on starting to rotationally graze hogs, or intensifying that rotation, which can add a little bit of labor, but as Mike will tell you, maybe actually not as much as one thinks. And then, or adding in some kind of vegetable into your pasture system, perhaps trying to expand markets. So I don't presume to know everyone that's joining us and what their goals are, but wanted to put potentially these parts in here as well to think about the research as I explain it. So as I mentioned, when we're terminating cover crops or potentially terminating pasture to put it into vegetable, as some might be doing, particularly in the area where we're in the Delta region, just south of Vancouver, in a heavy clay, often very wet soils, and so that impact of significant tillage is exacerbated by these clay soils in terms of destruction of structure. Additionally, if we're working with the smaller scale farmers, they might not have the machinery required to actually do that management practice of taking a cover crop field and tilling it in. Similarly, hog producers or other animal producers might, if you've only been doing pasture, might not have the same machinery as well. And so the idea was to try and integrate some new alternatives to just a straight tillage system. So our research objectives were basically or continue to be, find regenerative ways to manage cover crops and fertility while reducing our reliance on use of tractor tillage. Was the first one. The second one is to determine the potential benefits from integrating hogs into this vegetable production from an impact on soil quality, nutrient life cycle, and then importantly, the subsequent vegetable harvest. So the way and I'll explain this more now as I move on to materials and methods, but we're looking at both grazing hogs through our cover crop, and then coming back that following season and planting vegetables in to see if we're getting a benefit from the hogs into our next vegetable crop. So I'm gonna walk you through just the basic materials and methods of how we set up our research. My first, right out of university, my first boss, when I was working on a fully research farm, he explained to me that research agriculture was agriculture with more work. So basically what it looks like is we're trying to farm, but maybe on plot scale levels that we can take more data, so we can be out there every day, not just necessarily weeding, but also trying to take measurements, etc. So it's called a randomized complete block design. It's not that important, but the idea is that we had two treatments. One was grazing our hogs, and one was just using tillage, the way that that's the normal or the standard practice. And we did 4 replications of each, and that allows us to basically mitigate. If we just use one replication, maybe it's that spot in the field that impacts our data. But if we replicate it 4 different spots within a larger field, we're able to take out that, we call that noise. So our 2 treatments, as I mentioned, were grazing the pigs and then our tillage treatment. And we did this in about 30-foot by 230-foot plots. So basically these long strips of either grazing or tillage. And within each strip, we blocked that off into 6 different subplots. And so what I have here is a chart or a figure that helps us talk about that. So basically, when I say block, I mean our replication. So we've got the same thing done 1, 2, 3, and 4 times. And then within that, it's the treatment, whether we're grazing, which is in yellow, or tilling, which is in white, is randomized. So so it's not the same each time. And then within each strip, we have 6 different subplots. So as you can see here, this is a subplot, this is a main plot. And so as I'll talk about in terms of how we moved our pigs, we would put them into the first subplot in our grazing strip, and then we would move them through the subplots accordingly. And we would do that in 4 different strips. Please, if you have a question about what I'm talking about right now, blurt it out. But in general, if you have questions, please hold on to them, because we're going to answer all of the questions at the end of this. But if it's to clarify a point or something while I'm talking, please blurt it out. But otherwise, hold on to it or put it in the chat, and we'll make sure we come back to it. So the way we move the pigs through our subplots, and Mike's going to talk a bit more about this in terms of how we're doing it, the systems that we're using, the benefits from those systems. I'm not going to focus about that as much right now, because I want to move through the research fairly quickly to get, again, to the meat of the webinar. So what we're doing is we're moving the pigs through the subplots. And what we were doing essentially was doing that, trying to follow the conservation tillage principles, that we want about at least 30% of that cover crop to be eaten down. We didn't want any bare ground. And what that translated to was about every 7 days. So once a week, we were moving our hogs to the next subplot. Oh, there's my arrow. And what we were doing is we would move the pigs through those 6 subplots twice. And we were doing that with a cover crop system. So again, Mike's going to talk a bit more about the specifics of the cover crops, but we had a spring, a summer, and a fall cover crop planting. And so what we did is, as soon as we could get into the fields in the spring, we planted the entire field in our spring cover crop, which was oats, clover, and field pea. Again, he's going to talk more about that. And then we would, when we had reached about 75 days of growth, we put our hogs into the plots. now, then as we moved them, as they ate down each plot and we moved them, we would hand spread the summer cover crop 24 hours before, like the day before we were going to move them. And so that allowed them to trample that seed into the soil to, improve our germination rates. And so we augmented about 45% to, account for the pigs eating some of the seed. So we would hand spread the seed, next day, move the hogs. In the tillage plots where there weren't any hogs, we were just, we mechanically turned it. So we were using tillage to imitate what a farmer would do. We would till it and then hand spread our cover crop. So we did this twice, with the summer cover crop and with the fall cover crop. So what that looked like is on July 2 was when we were ready to that was about 75 days of growth of our spring cover crop. And we put in our fencing and it was ready for the pigs to go in. And so this is a look at the corner of the field. You can see we had quite a good growth of the oats and the peas. This is the very corner, so there was a bit of grass on this plot, but as you move back, there's no grass. And then we put the fencing in. I'm just giving you a teaser here. Mike's going to talk more about fencing and maintaining fences, but fences go in, and then the pigs go into the main plot. So here would have been our our grazing main plot. This is the tillage main plot next to it. And then you can see, due to our fence post, subplot, subplot, subplot. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the pigs this way through our subplots about once a week. This is looking at from the other corner, so you can see the main plots kind of going down this way. So this is a main plot, some tillage main plots, more hog main plots there in their housing structures. Those are some cute pigs too. So we were using mainly Berkshire hogs that we purchased from a farmer in the Delta. We do not do breeding at the farm, so we are purchasing piglets just from a local farmer in the area. This is so on August 17. So this is after we have moved the pigs through one time, and this is the emergence of the fall of the summer cover crop. So this is a buckwheat and a vetch mix. You can really see the buckwheat coming up here, and I've got another picture just so you can kind of see. Here's more buckwheat, but this is also to show regrowth of that spring cover crop, and Mike's going to talk more about that. If you can, I know that it existed because I know this post, but this was where our fencing was for one subplot. So this was a subplot, and you can see this subplot behind it. The growth is about a week less than this one because this was a week delayed because as we're moving the pigs through. This is just looking at it from the front of the field, looking back. So the hogs are all the way back at that last subplot, and it's a little hard to see, but you can basically just see the gradient of growth of this is now looking at the fall cover crop. So back here, there's very little growth yet because we would have just planted seed, but here in this foreground, the fall cover crop would have had about a month to start, emerging and germinating, emerging and growing. So this is on September 30. So our fall cover crop is in. This is what the tillage plots looked like. And this is what the hog plots looked like. And so you can see fairly similar levels of growth in terms of that fall cover. You can also see where those subplots were through the hog grazing. So this maybe isn't that interesting for this webinar at all, but just to let you know, we're doing significant amounts of data collection. So a lot of soil sampling from a chemical, physical, and biological perspective. We want to look at a lot of different components of the soil to see what's happening from grazing hogs versus our tillage. And so that's going to happen. All of this soil sampling happens in the spring. So what I'm going to be doing in the next, as soon as it dries up, so in about a month, I'm going to be going out to where we were doing hogs and tillage this past season and just sampling a lot of soil in each plot to get all of this data to see what happened from having our pigs in those plots. And then, as I mentioned, and this might, again, if you're interested in doing entering vegetable production, or you do a little bit of vegetable production, this will be interesting. Following the hogs, we're planting butternut and sweet corn in each main plot to try and get at how are the hogs impacting our subsequent vegetable crops. And so we did where's my cursor? 2 rows of squash and 6 rows of sweet corn per main plot. And we're looking at weed biomass, so weed emergence in our vegetable crops. Potentially hogs root around and are eat well, and so potentially they're either reducing our weed seed bed, or they're breaking up, particularly if we're thinking about maybe the seed bed, but also roots. So if we think about certain weeds that subsist in the soil due to rhizomes and root mass, perhaps the hogs are breaking up those weed cycles. And then also the yield and the crop performance throughout the season. So these are our two rows of squash, and these are 6 rows of corn. The corn's pretty high at this point, so you can't see the individual rows. The picture is a bit weedier than I would like. We were cleaning the field after each weed, and by cleaning I mean weeding, each weed counting and then starting from scratch. And this is, but once the corn had canopied, we were less concerned about weeding, and plus that we couldn't get in there with our BCS. So really quickly, preliminary results. I have not run a lot of the data, I've just been collecting, and now it's all cleaned up. But preliminary results, so hogs fit quite well into a small scale intensive production system. So particularly the target for this research of these small scale intensive vegetable farmers, that was our main target, although we're expanding that today to meat producers, and actually we're looking to expand the research with meat producers. It fit well into the system, and the vegetables we did, in the corn, we see visible differences. So what that looks like is, we saw anecdotal evidence in the grazing and tillage treatments impacting subsequent vegetable production. So what that looks like is, one of the reasons we use sweet corn is it's a great thing to sell. You can usually sell that pretty well. But it also is a really good indicator crop. Corn is a heavy feeder, particularly of nitrogen, and you can visibly see nitrogen differences in terms of color, in terms of height. And so what we saw in our field is that we're, particularly in the grazing strips, where hogs were defecating, they defecate in certain areas, we would see significantly taller and greener corn in those areas. So seeing that the hogs are potentially really impacting the nutrient quality of those vegetables. It'll be interesting to see if soil will change in this shorter term project. It's really difficult to get funding past a 2 to 3 year window, but for soil changes incredibly slowly, and so it'll be interesting to see if we see significant soil change from hog grazing. I'm quite confident that a long-term project would show significant health increases in the soil grazing versus tillage, but we'll see in a shorter term. And then this is a really good segue. We had quite a successful hog rotation system. It was low labor and cost, and Mike and I are the labor. So in a full-time farm, when this was just a part of our duties, we were able to manage it. And so the reason that is a good segue is because Mike's now going to talk more on the focus on hog production, the labor, the mechanics of it. And so I'm going to let him take over now. This is my contact information, my email and my phone number. So obviously we'll answer as many questions today, but I'm quite more than happy to answer questions outside of today, as well as if anyone is interested in potentially continuing some of this research on their farm to try and see how their specific environment, soil react, I'd be happy to talk more about that. So I am going to stop sharing now, and we'll go back to the main screen. And I see that there is stuff in the chat, and it looks like Mike's been answering questions throughout. So I'm gonna let him start talking, and I'll keep an eye on the chat, and then at the end we'll make sure we answer all the questions if they have not been answered. So thank you for your attention, and Mike, take it away.
Leia, can you make it so I can share my screen?
Sorry, I had to make you a co-host. That should allow you to share it.
Yep, that worked.
Okay.
And let's see what I need. Let me just go get organized. Everyone can have a quick stretch. Sit back up in our chairs. Make sure I have my chat box here somewhere. Perfect. And I'll expand that. Okay, everyone can hear me well. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the practicalities of how we designed a research project, how it worked, and maybe some takeaways that I had, and then considerations as if I were going to take this or try some sort of system similar on my farm, what I might change or look at changing. Here's just a quick photo of the pigs. One of the reasons we chose this field pea and oat cover crop mixture is that the pigs just love it. So here's just a fun shot of them eating it. So to touch base on our rotation strategy, basically, like Leia said, pigs were rotated through our 6 subplots, and it was all based on how fast they were eating through the cover crop. So we're using their foraging speed to determine when we moved them. The intention or design of 6 subplots was based on the idea that like roughly once per week the pig would move, which would give us about 6 weeks of regrowth on our initial cover crop. So here's just kind of Leia's image spun on its side. So we're all clarified. The pigs would start in plot 1. It would all be planted at the same time. The pigs would work their way through. And the day before we moved pigs from plot 1 to plot 2, we would spread seed over plot 1. The pigs would have about 24 hours with the seed in that plot to work it in with their hooves, and they would do most of our kind of harrowing, like Sean talked about, or asked the question about. We didn't actually physically spread out the manure. Since it was only 2 pigs in a reasonably large area, the manure didn't get so condensed that we were too worried about cover crop coming up behind it or needing to do that harrowing. My kind of experience with this strategy was basically that that first initial planting where all of the cover crop was uniform worked really well. With the field pea and oat situation, I think I talked about it. Yeah. So with the field pea and oat situation, because it took 6 weeks for them to go through the whole plot, the peas kind of started to peter out and the oats began to mature. So it provided a good food and forage source for the whole 6 weeks. But I think if I was going to do it on my own farm, we'd take a look at some other cover crops for the second one, because 6 weeks didn't quite feel like enough regrowth to get a good stand following the pigs. So you can see in this photo here, this is the kind of second regrowth, which we had the clover, sudex, and the buckwheat in. And it begins to be a little bit patchy as you move the pigs through because of some bare areas. And the amount of forage just isn't as significant as would be ideal in the first kind of run through. So these are the, like Leia said, cover crops that we decided to include. So in spring, we did the oats and field peas with an undersown of Ladino clover. Based on this experience, I really do enjoy, I think oats and field peas is a really great spring summer mix for pigs. You can see we allowed the peas to mature enough that they had pods on. It's just a really great protein source. And we'll see, I have a little video later, but as the pigs travel through, the oat heads start to mature. We let them mature to that point because we know we're going to till it in nicely and it'll winter kill. And the pigs will actually walk around kind of eating the oats off of the plants. I think it's a really great energy source for them and they adapt really well to it. I wouldn't maybe suggest having the clover in this initial planting because it just didn't really seem to succeed really well. Our summer mix, we were working with the Sudex, buckwheat, and Ladino clover. So here's just a quick picture of kind of the level of regrowth we were getting in the 6 weeks. So you can see the Sudex was like just starting to come up, buckwheat a little bit more established, but not significantly. I really think either finding something that comes up a little bit faster or giving them more than 6 weeks would probably be a good strategy in this situation. I've used Sudex for pigs in the past. When it gets quite tall, they really enjoy it. And it has that sorghum cross. So the stems are kind of sweet and they spend a lot of time chewing on it and they quite like it. But the 6 weeks is a little bit tight for it. Ladino clover probably is okay in the summer, as then at that point it might become a little more established to try and overwinter in the fall, depending on where you're at. For our fall cover crop, fall rye and vetch is a reasonably standard one that we do. I'll show you a slide at the very end, but we're in a very high pressure area for migratory birds. And we're at sea level, so most of our winter cover crop gets wiped out no matter what. So you'll have to base it kind of on your farm. This is just a quick photo of, right when the pigs moved out of the tail end, probably plot 5 to 6 of the pea and oat mix. And there's just a lot of nice fiber that I've thought worked really well as a seed bed for a seeding strategy. It helped, this was our ideal for cover crop regrowth. Here's just this other initial shot. So when we think about it, the bare areas really weren't successful. And I think you'd want to really try and avoid any bare areas from forming or have a tall enough stand that you can see, well, I'm not sure if you can see or how well it's translating over, but any area there was significant crop stubble left over from the pigs is where we had the best regrowth. So our fencing strategy for these hogs was basically a 2-strand system. We were using the kind of Gallagher brand turbo braid. We've been really happy working with that. It's a kind of denser electric fence material. It allows us to get a good tension, which is really nice for this setup. We were also using their 7/8 inch fiberglass rod posts. Again, this is another product we've been really happy with as far as pasturing our hogs. They're fairly resistant and you don't need to worry about hanging anything off of them because they're insulated themselves. So basically the whole strategy was we would annually place our plot fencing. So the full runs, they're annually placed. We did it once a year. We would mow through the cover crop just because we couldn't have it grounding out on the pasture. We did this with our flail mower. We have a BCS. It tended to work really well and provided enough of a path through. And then our cross fences were just mobile, which I'll show a video and we'll talk about it a little bit more. It was all off a solar energizer. We don't have a permanent power source on the farm. And, I think it was a Gallagher brand solar energizer worked just great on doing enough fencing for us. Here's just kind of another quick shot, not a very straight line. Kind of leads to one of the challenges of this system is you do need to maintain those fence lines. And you can see here, the left side was a tillage plot. The right side was our animal plots. The clover really was coming up under the fence line where it wasn't being as disturbed as much. So it might not want to include it in a cover crop mix because clover seed can be a little bit expensive. Here's just a little quick video we made that demonstrates one of our weekly hog moves. It's only 3 minutes, which is kind of what we dialed it down to. And I think it really just demonstrates how fast you can be rotating your animals through if you have a well-designed system. let me just make sure audio is going to be turned on. Can you hear that when I play it? Someone nod for me. No, okay, 1 second. Okay, this should do it.
Sustainable food.
Yeah, we can.
My name is Michael Robinson. I'm a research associate at the Institute for Sustainable Food Systems at KPU. I'm here today to share a little bit about our hog research project, specifically to take you through the process of moving the hogs into a new rotational grazing.
So you can see we're just using the like tension-based handles, allows us to leave the fence on. It's just really quick, unhooks from the fiberglass posts.
Plot. So, as you can see here, we begin by unhooking the fence from the back edge of the previous grazing plot and moving it up into its new position. This allows the hogs to move into their new plot. They're pretty well trained by this point, and with little hesitation they move into their stand of field peas and oats. While not always necessary, we like to ensure the hogs stay in their new plot with a little extra feed.
Michelle, do you have a question?
Next, we move their shelter into the plot. These are a mobile shelter designed to be moved by 1 or 2 people and to comfortably house both hogs in each plot. While the hogs are distracted with the food, we move the back fence up and close them fully into the new plot. The last thing that needs done is moving and setting back.
Oops, sorry.
Hi, my name.
Oh, we're good. We're good.
While the hogs are distracted with the food, we move the back fence up and close them fully into the new plot. The last thing that needs done is moving and setting back up the barrel water system we use for these hogs. This move took us all of 3 minutes. We think that rotational grazing systems like this really represent a great option for raising hog on pasture. It's low labor and the materials needed are quite affordable. Finally, we wanted to say thanks for watching. We hope something in this system people find useful. Stay tuned for more videos demonstrating some of our infrastructure, day before move prep, and more.
Yeah, so that was just kind of like real time how long it takes us to move them with this setup. So I think it works really well. And it's quite fast. It kind of showed a bit more of the fence setup that we had. Also highlights, I think, the oats on the tail end. So this is the 6th plot that they're moving into, and just like kind of you can see the field peas have died down a little bit at this point, and the oat heads have started to mature, which the pigs also get a lot of feed value out of.
Hi.
Let's go. So I think Zoe asked earlier, which maybe I'll for irrigation. Because of the research, components of it, we had to kind of limit irrigation to plot specific irrigation. So what we were doing was just using like a backyard sprinkler on a hose and watering each subplot kind of one at a time to reduce like uneven watering. If we were splashing over multiple plots, and it can kind of throw off our data a little bit. So not necessarily ideal on a production system, but limited because it was a research system. So our housing, some combination of basically wooden frames with a cattle panel mesh roof that we attached a tarp onto. It was designed specifically for this research project to be able to be moved by like 1 or 2 people and survive our 2 seasons necessary for the project. So basically affordable, light enough to move. It doesn't have to be resilient forever because hogs, as anyone who has them know, can cause a lot of damage to structures. We started out, and you can kind of see here, we'll look in the next photo, there's some EMT conduit that we had to bend to support the roof. Started out trying it without that, but of course the hogs decided that climbing on top of the roof was a great idea and like sagged all the roofs in. Yeah. So here's just kind of that shot again, showing the houses. So some wheels on the back, handles on the front, basically a basic structure, only designed, as Leah said, for kind of like spring, summer, early fall. Because of our soil and where we're at, as well as our systems, we're really not overwintering hogs like this. We have overwintered hogs on this farm, but it's more of a kind of deep bedded high tunnel system where we use our vegetable high tunnels and keep the hogs in there over the winter. I think if you're looking at adopting a housing system like this, something like a all metal frame would be probably a lot more successful and hold together. You could probably get a light one welded up reasonably cheaply. Another kind of issue with these shelters was the cover on the roof could use a little more work on design. If the hogs get bored, and that has a little bit to do with kind of the fencing testing question we were talking about. If they got bored or their cover crop was more reduced, which happened more so in the summer grazing when the cover crop stand started smaller, they'd begin to like chew on things or bother the fences. And we had a situation where like one of them chewed the tarp off the top of the house, which isn't necessarily ideal. As well, these wheels are okay. It's always at least in my experience, a challenge like having permanent wheels on hog structures because they tend to rub on everything they come near, and the axles can be a weak point. Thought about some sort of system where you attach the wheels every time. It's okay with these 2x6s because the wheels like level with the top of the 2x6, so there's less for them to push against. But if you're going to change to a metal structure, that might change. So, give and take here and there. Our water system. So since we're studying specifically the effects of hogs on the soil, we had to limit their ability to wallow and limit like significant water exposure onto the soil. So we designed this barrel watering system, I guess, to limit spillage in mind, based on kind of a rough 1.5 gallons per pig per day number for these growers. The 20-gallon barrel was like more than, enough for them to get water if we refilled it every day. We had it outside of the fence because, that would be a fairly wobbly system and pigs would knock it over. So they could still drink successfully, but not meaningfully interact with the barrels or the barrel stands themselves. Fence management was really important with this system. And you can see we have we had to start doing insulating posts right next to the water because the metal nipple was conductive and we really had to avoid the line touching the water in any scenario. So here, this is not a great angle. There's a lot more room here than it looks, but the pigs, really successfully, and they had no problem getting their water needs through these systems. Here's just another shot of it. It was just 20-gallon barrels with a nipple mounted on some fittings. We thought it worked pretty well for us. Well enough that we've worked on adapting. So we've adapted this whole system for our main flock of pigs, which is about 20. So based off of this, barrel system, we've tried one that's an upgraded one with an ICB tote, where we use kind of plastic milled panels and mounted nipples on that. Had pretty good success. It allows us to fill up like once a week for our main flock of pigs, and we can leave it right in the plot. Needs a little bit of work on nipple attachment. We had one or two of them break off where the hogs really aggressively rubbed against them, but we thought it worked pretty well. And here's just a quick shot of like what the plots looked like yesterday. So just to give you an idea of like the soil on our farm, how badly like the water table sits at that sea level. So some of the challenges to do with this project and why we aren't getting the hogs into the cover crop into July is just that like this has been eaten down by multiple flocks of migratory birds and it's quite high sea level. So yeah, that's kind of the system as it stands. So I think we're going to go into some sort of a Q&A type session.
Yeah, I know there have been a lot of questions in the chat that have been answered, and I'm sure people have additional questions as well. It might actually also be helpful to just reiterate some of the questions that have been answered in the chat for the benefit of people who are calling in for this as well, or if you want to elaborate at all on the answers given there. So if people want to turn their mics off and ask questions verbally, go for it. Otherwise, you can throw it in the chat as we've been doing.
Well, I'll just start. There's been a couple of questions regarding when we were planting cover crops in the chat that we've been trying to respond to, but perhaps to make sure that, again, those calling in is, did we plant immediately after the hogs? And when were we planting cover? And so we were spreading during the research, we were hand broadcasting seed 24 hours before we were moving the hogs. So that was happening basically at the same time. And then we were matching our tillage spreading to match those dates. So somewhere in between, obviously if we're every week we're spreading a subplot, it's not, we can't broadcast the whole tillage plot that way. So we were mimicking that. So we had about, I put the dates in and we'll make the chat available as well. But let me just make sure I get this. So we were put our spring cover crop in May 13th, the summer crop in July 22nd, 7th, and then the last day of August for our fall cover crop. And that was mimicked approximately what was happening in the pig plots.
I can answer your question, Kathy. So like we said, so we did the hog project the hog rotation was the first year. Second year in the same plots, we did vegetable rotation. So it overwintered, like I showed you that photo previously. That's kind of what it looks like right now. Then we do our kind of basic field prep on it as we do for a lot of our fields. So we have quite a big hard pan because this field's been coming out of industrial potato production. So we do subsoiling to kind of try and break up a little bit of that hard pan. We go through with the discs and try and chop up any stubble left over and start mixing up the soil. And then we did one quick tillage pass. And then a little bit of fertility. We added some compost amendments as well before the tillage pass. Yeah, that's about it.
Ava, I believe, so I just have there's a question about where we can get access to everything afterwards. So what will happen is we're recording this as well as logging the chat. And then in addition, Mike and I will send just the slide decks to Ava and she will make it available through.
Yeah, we'll be sharing that through our newsletter. So if you're a member of the small scale meat producers, you'll be getting a newsletter in the next couple weeks with a link to the recording and the slide deck and the chat. So if you're not a member yet, better join.
I just had a question because it appears in both the tillage and the pig plots, there was some tillage for prep of the vegetables. After that, have either of you done any work with regenerative agriculture where you're using absolutely no till? We're moving that way with no till at all. We run goats as well, so we tend to have really good compost. So we're going to run the pigs over, and then depending on what we get for if there is any serious weed issues, because we're converting some of our paddocks, putting on a fairly heavy layer of compost and running vegetables on that. So I'm just wondering if you've had any experience doing that previously, putting that into a rotation with pigs. And we're going to be rotating with goats as well.
I can talk to that a little bit. Certainly familiar with it, and it's something we're like aspiring to move in the direction of. This site specifically, and like more specifically the back of the farm where this is, because of the very high water table, it's like really challenging us for to not till, because you know, the soil surface just gets quite significantly packed. And as well, this part of the farm we've only been into for say 3 or 4 years now. Before that, it was about 20 years of industrial potato production. So there's very limited soil organic matter. So at least in this plot, really challenging to do that. I'd love to see it done in a system like that, but just because of the confines in the site, it's not something we're able to do.
So to also build off of Mike's answer, I have done no-till, not using hog production, and there are some. So it doesn't quite apply here, but there's a couple of options too to kind of move away from using tillage at all. One is to strip till. So you would be basically having to a third of the tillage and just leaving. Again, none of this we would really be able to do at the site where we're doing the research, but if you've got drier soil, to basically leave whatever and then strip till in where you're going to be putting your vegetables, and that's creating some really good suppression. The other thing is that if you don't have incredibly really high water table, or flocks of snow geese that are destroying your cover crop, there are some really cool crimping or crimping systems to basically to lay flat that either your overwintered cover crop, or if you broadcast a spring cover crop, to just basically lay it down, or even mow it down. And the reason crimping works is because if you mow it, usually it'll regrow. But if you crimp it down, and it basically creates a green manure and a really good transplant or seeding bed, as well as then suppression for weeds. So they're assuming that you have some drier soils and some good pasture. That is an option. That does, of course, if you're crimping, that is a machine, an implement. You pull it on the back of the tractor. But there is significant amounts of work that's been done on that, and with some success. So that is an option too, Zoe. Other questions?
Leah, you had also mentioned, I think, that the research is or can continue on people's personal farms.
Yeah.
So can you talk more about that?
Yeah, something that I've actually been talking about with Bess Legault up in the Peace region is working on putting together some money to basically expand this onto producers' land. So participatory research. So it would not be, point for point the same research that we're doing, but trying to basically look at grazing hogs, integrating that into potentially integrating that into vegetable production, and just looking at the differences. So that would be, if folks are interested, we're currently basically putting together a funding scheme for that, and for a grant. So basically farmers would conduct the research on their lands with guidance, as well as input costs covered, et cetera. And so when, the idea would be it's not of cost necessarily to the farmer, and they can kind of be, it's a way to see in real time and on your land what the difference is.
That's awesome. And is there room within that for people to kind of try out different things, like if they wanted to do no-till?
Yeah, so that would be really great. So basically the idea would be to try and tailor each project to that farmer. So we could sit down and it'd be nice to generally follow the objectives of this research, but then to add in different things or take out other things depending on the farmer's interest.
I would be highly interested in that. I have a master's in animal science. And
okay, great. Yeah.
So I love research.
Okay, great. Let's connect afterwards. That'd be great.
Leah, do you want to put your email address in the chat? So
I will. It's on the slide deck as well, but just in case folks didn't get it, I will put it as well.
Probably the easiest way.
Yeah.
Question for Mike, that video that you shared, the 3-minute rotation there, is there somewhere that we can find that? Is it online?
Is it? I'm not sure if it's on is it on our website already?
It should be.
Yeah, either way, it will be up. And as well, we're going to do a couple more, including like the seed fretting and stuff. And most of that, if you look up the ISFS or KP website, you should be able to find the hog project on there.
Great. Yeah, the video did a really good job of capturing the different elements there. It was fantastic. I have a kind of dumb question that I'm sure was covered. What was the size of each of those plots again?
So each subplot was 30 feet wide by 38 feet long, such that a whole plot was 30 feet wide by about 230 feet long.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And Wollapack just put the link to our website into the chat too, where the video will be available.
Excellent. Are there any questions that didn't get addressed that people had put in the chat and didn't get answered, or anything that you'd like to hear more about from what's in there?
I see Sean's raising his hand.
Yeah, Lacey and I have a question. We have pigs here on our farm, and we've never seen them not till, no matter what we do. Even if they go into a field that's full of all their goodies, they'll still till into the earth. So is it we've never run Berkshire? Is that a breed specific thing, or did they just have enough goodies and only in there for a week that they didn't actually till into the ground?
So not necessarily breed specific, although some breeds, like there is variance. So depending on what breed you're running, you might just have like a bloodline or a breed that's really dig happy. But for us, certainly it is like the pace of movement and then keeping them like occupied enough that hopefully there's enough for them to eat and stay happy. The first move through with the peas and the oats, really more successful on reducing tillage. The second pass through, when we had less of a good stand of cover crop, they're digging a lot more.
And just to add to that, Sean, Lacey, the idea, there was some rooting. We didn't really show good pictures of that, but one of the ideas of using hogs in this system is that they do root around and till a little bit and dig in there, so that it kind of almost mimics a tractor tillage. So the idea wasn't to prevent digging at all, like all digging, but just to reduce, and that because it's a natural way of kind of turning the soil over rather than pulling steel through and just totally destroying your structure.
Okay, that's what we were curious about.
Yeah.
So ours do a great job of tilling the soil. Definitely, they root like crazy. But yeah, we were curious about that. So it is the speed of movement, and that they're being kept active. Okay.
Do you mind if I contribute to that? So I run Berkshires and Tamworth, and I found my Berkshires don't till nearly as much as the Tamworth do. The Tamworth will go straight in there and dig all the roots up. The Berkshires will graze off the cover crops and then start rooting.
Yeah, we run coonies, and I used to do weaner to market with large breeds, and because we have a very small farm, we didn't want any rooting. And they're one of the few, if only, breed that does not root. Yeah, I've been very happy with this breed because we do farrow to finish with them, and easy to manage, and particularly well suited for a very small farm in our estimation. And we're looking at, I think, into rotation and quality of meat, and looking at charcuterie and stuff like that as well.
Pure straight up cooney?
Yes, at the moment. We're looking at maybe introducing for a terminal sire, if we can work with somebody who has red wattles, and maybe do a half red wattle boar over our sows, and then those will be our finish. Pigs.
We have Cooney American Guinea hog that don't seem to root as much. We have Ossabaw, purebred Ossabaw, and they'll go to China. Like, they'll just anything. They don't eat much off the surface. But the Cooney cross we supplement their feed with hay in the winter, so they like their grass. But we are also on really hard clay, and we're on new land as well that's been abandoned for quite some time. It's just been running cattle and horses and stuff like that. So we're really compacted really badly. What we wanted to do was put our tiller pigs into a patch that last year was completely covered with wild roses.
It's actually not as useful as you think it would be, disappointingly. Oh, I did something.
I don't know who's talking. Okay. So I was hoping that this would be about the pigs actually breaking the ground and digging into those weeds, those really invasive weed plants. Do you suggest maybe putting them in for that first and then cover cropping it, or how do we get rid of that invasive hard pack nastiness without running a tiller through it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let Mike might have better answers to this. It also depends on the weed species. We've had pretty good success on our farm in terms of the pigs really getting rid of thistle, like eating and rooting out thistle, which is pretty hard to get rid of otherwise. Tillage just doesn't seem to do it. So that's been good. Mike, other answers to that?
Yeah, it's certainly like a challenging thing, at least in our experience, if you already have hard pack and quite a bit of that perennial weed, like the extent that they need to graze or till or be contained in that same area to manage that is pretty significant. And I guess depending on the breed, I'm not super familiar with Ossabaw, like, or the weed, hard to answer. But you might be better off like at least getting some sort of mechanical tillage, like a subsoiler through, to at least breaking up a little bit and really help the animals then to have like more room to manipulate things. You could try, depending on when you are, some like deeper rooted cover crops. We attempted to use like tillage radish here, but down on the coast it won't winter kill, so then we created a weed problem. You could look at something like that might help also. So or like maybe an alfalfa, something that will help from a root perspective break in.
And also potentially spread that before putting the pigs in, so you're providing a bit more feed for them other than just perennial. So they'll stay in that paddock a bit longer, and kind of root into it a bit harder.
But definitely a challenge.
Yeah, we had challenges if there wasn't enough to graze. They just turn it into, especially because we're wet here, it just turns it into a mud pit pretty quickly.
Kathy, I'm curious if you want to speak to your experience using pigs for the actual tilling.
Sure. We had a 5-acre plot in Langley that had actually no topsoil at all when we moved in. It had been quarried years ago and never remediated. So we use pigs on a rotational grazing system, fixed fences, 3 sections. One would have the pigs in, then we'd have veg production in another and cover crop in another, and we would rotate them around that system. We found they were excellent for weed cover. Again, we had some weed control, not weed cover. Same sort of thing. We would prep the beds with light tillage, just do 1 pass over and then just use the tiller to put up the beds for weed production. But we were finding, over time, over the 5 or 6 years that we ran pigs like that, we found really good increased quality of our soil. We ended up with a huge topsoil, and we didn't put any other inputs in other than using the pigs to run over. So very much like what they were doing at KPU. We did speak to Corinne Singfield at the time at KPU, and she came out and looked at our systems. But yeah, they were fantastic when they were in the fields and not escaping.
Leah and Mike, is that something that KPU might be interested in doing further research in the future? It sounds like it might not work on that site, but maybe elsewhere.
You mean in terms of basically reclaiming land?
Specifically using hogs for tillage.
I mean, yes, it's definitely something we can look into. It would be a good thing to put into specific farmer research, you know, in terms of sites, because yeah, it's not something we can do necessarily at our site, but it would be a factor that we could include.
Yeah, we're always looking to like expand our research opportunities, and like, you know, we're working as researchers and getting ideas from farmers or problems farmers have that they want answered is like that research we actually want to be doing, because that's the most useful for the community. So if you have like burning questions, shoot us some emails.
I think we have probably about every worst case scenario you can think of on our land. We're up north in the Caribou region on 100 acres, and we've got the pigs specifically for clearing land. We have lots of forested area, and we want to put in some silvopasture. But the pasture that we do have is, like I said, very neglected, very compacted. There's probably 3 species that have just invaded the area that nothing else can survive in it. But we've got a little bit of burdock, and we've got a little bit of thistle, and we've got a little bit of roses, and and that's about all that survives in our field. So we're hoping that the pigs can help with all of those different scenarios here.
Lacey, we've got a similar situation to you. We moved from that plot in Langley. We're out on 60 acres in Creston now, and this land has been heavily tilled, so badly abused for years and years, and we've just got dust on top, clay and hard pan underneath. So our plan is the same, to do some subsoiling and some ripping to break up that hard pan beneath. And it kind of hurts my heart to do that, because I really want to be a no-till farmer. I really don't want to disturb the soils, but it's just so badly abused that we are left with no other option really. And then we'll run pigs and livestock over it in a rotational system as well.
Well, seeing as you're up that far, is it possible to do a small plot with some tillage radishes? They are incredible. And just see.
Yeah, we've looked at doing different kinds of root crops. We've got some mangles here we were gonna practice with, and had thought about planting that in and then using the pigs to till them back up, because they'll go right into the ground after them. So we'll see. We'll experiment with that a little bit and see what it does.
And goats are perfect for roses, burdock.
Yeah, we run hair sheep as well, and they're very similar. They have the sheep aspects, but they also have the goat aspects. So they're dealing with our poplar issue and the roses. So yeah, they've cleared a good patch for us and gotten rid of a lot of the ugly stuff that we don't want here. But
I'm curious to hear from some of the other people on the call here what your situation is, and how, like, whether you currently have hogs and you're looking at adding vegetables, or whether you have vegetables and you're looking at adding hogs, or what you would hope to accomplish.
Hi, my name's Katie Peck. I'm up in the Peace region actually, so I've had some conversations with Bess about possibly doing some trials on our farm. We currently do a little bit of both. We're kind of in a startup situation. We have run hogs the past 2 years, and we have a no-till veg production, but they're not combined right now. So we're kind of just interested in what that might look like in the future. And right now I'm using hogs to till some of my areas first, and that's kind of how we got into hogs in the first place. So that's just kind of where we're at. So yeah, we're kind of excited to see what we can do. We are interested in the Peace program up here. Once that kind of gets started, I think we're signed up to do some of this up here. So interested to see how we can translate some of that stuff into our growing area up here in the north. We're definitely in a little microclimate right off the Peace River. So I think we have some interesting opportunities up here.
Katie, what breed of pig are you using?
So right now we don't breed either. We don't overwinter at this point. So we do buy piglets, and we've been doing mixed, I think it's Berkshire, Hertfordshire, off of a farmer in town here, and have really good success with that, as they actually graze really well and also do till where I need them to. So it's been kind of nice.
Julia, were you going to chime in?
Yes, I was actually. I'm in Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island, so not quite as accessible to you guys, but VIU is just up the road. So if you have a collaboration with them, I mentioned to Michael, I think he answered that one. But I don't buy in my pigs, I breed them myself. And I have a set of pork pigs that I raise every year, plus my breeders, and I sell weaners and stuff like that. But so my challenge is keeping my land from getting ruined by the pigs. And so rotation for me is a huge thing. And yes, I use electric fencing ad nauseum. And electric nets, etc., etc. So my challenge is, once the pigs have, especially the breeders, have come out of an area, what I do to reclaim it, so it's ready for them to go back into it. So I have a number of sort of smaller fields and pastures that I rotate them through, but I still run out. I have to be really careful of my density. I'm a very small farm, of my density, otherwise the land just gets absolutely ruined. So that's why I'm very interested in what you plant to get the soil back and to get the vegetation back. So my challenge is water in the winter. Yes, in a couple of my pastures, the water level looks about the same as yours. Not quite as bad, but it is pretty bad. And I've tried some trenching and stuff like that, but without too much success. Anyway, so I've tried some of the cover crops that you've tried, and I find that some of them work here, some of them don't. I've got incredibly rocky soil, but it's not too bad. It's certainly not clayey, which is great. So I'm really looking for finding the best cover crop to put in behind the pigs that will provide enough food for them for 3 weeks a month, depending on what the weather is and whether I've got swamps or not. So I'd be really interested in some collaborative research, and yeah, I have some education in animal physiology and ecology and stuff like that. So sort of at least I think if I can engage my brain cells again, I can probably help out with some research.
Well, that sounds great. I'm actually living in Victoria right now, so.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, come up, I can get some free labor.
Sounds good.
Well, thanks for sharing, Katie and Julia. Does anyone have any last questions or want to share their situation before we close? Sharon?
I would like to chime in just for a couple minutes. Sorry, I missed it. I'm going to look for it and watch it all. Focus. For me, I'm on quite a big piece, and I'm north of Smithers, so not as far up is the piece. And I think it's sandy loam, but the pastures are in rough shape. They're just worn out. So what we've been doing is bale grazing throughout the winters, and we have cows, horses, pigs, goats. And the pigs, yeah, they really till their Tamworth. But for us, it seems like an advantage because there's all that seed bank in there. And then there's all the seeds that come with the hay. And then I go out and broadcast peas and oats and things. So it's still just a real experimental. It's our 4th year. But what I'm mostly interested is in the pig nutrition and what I can plant and turn them in, because what they get mostly is grain. And I feel like we should be able to do better. But I think most of you are growing vegetables to sell. Is that true? Or wanting to?
Yeah, the project was designed with like a vegetable marketing as the kind of pairing with hogs.
So rotating the pigs through and sort of smaller plots and growing vegetables behind them, not for them.
Exactly, yeah.
Right. Okay.
We did supplement with a little bit of feed to some partially to keep them full and busy enough so that they weren't I mean that's kind of what the forage is for, but so we did supplement in the research with some higher protein feed. But that's again if you're wanting to supplement rather than just, as you're saying, on a larger scale, just grazing, Sharon.
Yeah, I think like Sharon, I would.
Well, I don't think they can just graze. I think they do need more than that.
Yeah, like Sharon, I would be also interested in some research on that. I have a few books on, different things for pigs, particularly for our kunis, because they are a little different from the large breeds in that we feed so much less grain to them, and they are such good foragers. But yeah, certainly implementing crops that can feed the pigs would also be, I think, of interest for a lot of producers as well, and not so much looking at, we would like to move into selling more vegetables as well, so that is our goal, but also looking at, putting in rotation for specific feed for the pigs, because we live on Vancouver Island and feed costs are just exorbitant here. And being able to grow our own quality forage would be something we'd be very interested in as well.
There's a comment just in the chat in case anyone is not paying attention that Katerina said they're part of the Loop program and they get a lot of veggies and fruit for the pigs through them. And I know that we also
and also saving labor.
I'm sorry, Sharon, can you say that again? Okay, well, I'll keep going. So I'm not sure if that's a possibility. Granted, this is added feed. We gave, we use all of our veggie scraps, unmarketable and old stuff to the pigs as well. But again, that's not like a stable source, just basically an additive. Although, Mike, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it was the Loop program, but the farmer that we bought the pigs from, he also had a connection with some of the larger scale supermarkets, and he had crates and crates and crates of veggies that he was. Granted, you might have to be closer to an urban area for that, but he was getting tons of avocados for his pigs and etc.
Yeah, we don't. I think people should be aware of, rules and regulations from CFIA from scrap feeding. There's this African swine fever that people have to be very concerned about, and it would be devastating if that was brought in by a small producer, because that would bring regulation down severely on most people. So I think people should be very cautious of feeding scrap food to their animals. And just take a look at the regulations in Canada for scrap feeding in pork producers.
So
Yeah.
is that specific to fruits and vegetables, or is that other things?
I think it's beneficial if people, go to the CFI site and look at the rules and regulations on scrap feeding for swine. You have to be able to guarantee that produce has never touched anything else. And that's very hard to do coming from a grocery store. And there are regulations in place already. And I think it's beneficial if producers are aware of those rules and regulations when they're feeding their animals.
Two comments about the feeding pigs on the cheap. Something that we've noticed over the last couple of years of doing pigs is two things. One, we buy bales of alfalfa hay for our sheep, and last year we took a round bale and we put it into squares because it's easier for me to manage. But the place that we were running that baler, the amount of seed and whatnot that came off that alfalfa bale, that it sprouted in the middle of our yard. So the waste off of a single bale of alfalfa would probably get you some feed and some seed. And so if you feed your pigs alfalfa hay in their grazing area, a lot of that seed will come up. The wasted seed will come up. And also we've looked at feeding them soaked grains and whatnot. But then there's the mineral deficiencies are the big concern when you're pasturing pigs or putting them on a single cover crop or something. There's going to be a gap for their mineral nutritional needs and whatnot. You can get pig mineral specifically that you add to whatever you're feeding them so that it closes that loop in, and it's quite cheap actually. Most of farm centers will sell it by the 20 kg bag. So that is something to consider. But the one thing that we did notice that cut the bill down quite a bit was feeding them hay. So this year we're gonna look at getting a shredder, like just a leaf shredder, so that we can run flakes of hay through it and combine it with their grain or whatever their daily ration is. Because it gives them the greens during the winter, and then the seed in the spring. Anything that touches the ground will sprout. So thoughts anyway.
Yeah, we feed hay through the winter. Ours are partial to third cut orchard grass.
Okay, well, we're just getting close to 11:30, and I want to make sure I get everyone out on time. Are there any final questions for Leah and Mike before we let them go? It sounds like anyone who's interested in potentially bringing this research project onto their property can get in touch with Leah to talk about what that might look like. Which would be a really neat opportunity to kind of test it out in different circumstances. And if you have any additional questions, Leah, I think you had said that people are welcome to get in touch with you as well, if you think of something afterwards. So her email is in the chat if you scroll up, as well as the link for the KPU's Institute for Sustainable Food Systems and this project. So I want to say thank you to Leah and Mike for speaking today. This is clearly a really interesting project for meat producers in our province, and so we appreciate you doing this research and being willing to present today. And to all the attendees, thanks for being here. I'm just going to send that link again for membership for the small scale meat producers. If you're interested in joining and you're not already, members will also be receiving the recording and notes from this event. So if you want to check back over some of the things that we covered, that'll be an easy way to do that. And we'll look forward to being in touch with all of you when we launch our survey this summer as well. So please stay in touch. Keep watching on Facebook, watch for our newsletter. And if you don't hear from us, get in touch directly because we should be hearing from every single one of you. So thanks again, and everyone take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you all.